has happened. Oversimplified has returned after a year and brings us probably his best video
Show
to
love
date.
100.
Oh.
Hello my love. Hi
Hi
Erin.
Fountain, love
Hi
you.
Love 1 Zaruk Mile Zaruk George Zaruk.
But yes, this is Oversimplified's best video to date. And we're going to be checking it out. Me, being a history nerd, I will do my best to keep my, my nerdness to a minimum. But hey, you know, what are you going to do? So, with that, sit back, relax, and let's dive right into it, shall we?
All right, our beloved mercenaries. Let's hear it. Okay,
So, let's give a little bit of context here. For those who haven't seen the first Punic War video, or maybe you don't know your ancient history, let's talk about Carthage real quick. Carthage was a oligarchy that was most known for its mercantile trade. Oh, sorry, mercantile ability. Mercantile or trading is a trade of its own. The Carthaginians didn't have a standing army. They hired mercenaries. They were so wealthy that they could afford to hire multiple mercenaries to fight their wars for them. But here's the problem. By the end of the First Punic War, well, they lost. And they had spent so much money not only hiring these mercenaries, but also paying off their reparations to the Romans, because, I mean, when you win the war, naturally that means that the losers have to pay you for the damages done. So this is right after the end of the First Punic War, and we are going to see that because of how, well, not very good with their money that the Carthaginian council has been, they're not going to be able to pay these guys. And this leads to a lot of turmoil that a lot of people kind of skip over in history, because it's not like First Punic War, then immediately after the Second Punic War happens. No, there's about a decade or two. There's about 2 decades in between, and these early parts of these 2 decades, let's just say the Carthaginians have more than the Romans to worry about.
thank you one and all for your hard work fighting in the First Punic War. Would have been nice if you'd won. Maybe tried a little harder. But this isn't the finger-pointing convention. I know you all have one thing on your minds. Hey, when are we all getting paid? Simmer down. Remember you lost your... Okay. Jim, why don't you tell them? I'm not telling them, you tell them. Ugh. Look, you're not getting paid. What? We lost the First Punic War and owe the Romans a ton of reparations. Of course we can't pay you in full. Let's burn this place to the ground! Hey! Don't burn this place to the ground. Come on, fellas. Will killing us really make you feel better about your money? Yes. Way to go, sir. Shut up, Jim. You're fired. I guess that makes 2 of us. Huh?
So, yes. And this right here may as well be the entire thing that captures the Second Punic War. When people think of the Second Punic War, they think of Hannibal, elephants, and crossing the Alps. Though, there's way more to the conflict than that. The entire reason Hannibal crosses the Alps is, well, I'll explain why he does that when we get to that point. But for now, all you need to know is that that's the most famous part of the event, obviously, is crossing the Alps. But it's not something he wanted to do. It was kind of forced on him. But I'll explain when we get there.
In the aftermath of the First Punic War, Carthage's disgruntled mercenaries, left unpaid for all their hard work, revolted, and Carthage found itself caught up in an extremely destructive mercenary war. The panicked Carthaginians hired more mercenaries to fight the mercenaries they couldn't afford to pay, and Carthage came dangerously close to collapse.
Now you're probably wondering, like that little mercenary asked, wait, where'd the money come from? So, the thing is, the weird way mercenaries work, at least at this time period, if my memory serves me correctly, because I read this somewhere, maybe wrong, I may be right, so take what I say with a grain of salt. However, if I remember correctly, mercenaries at the time period kind of had a hiring fee, and then once their job was done, however long you kept them around, you paid them for their service. So this basically meant that, you could hire them on. You'd have to give them a flat rate to hire them. But then once you were concluded with their services, you would or their term was up, you would pay them. So, and they could also, depending on the mercenary groups, they could charge more for where you sent them. They could charge for different amounts of time, whatever. So probably what ended up happening is the Carthaginians basically reached into whatever treasury they had left over to hire these guys on the grounds of, well, we don't have enough to pay off all of the guys who we're currently fighting against. And not to mention, considering they're basically burning Carthage to the ground at the moment, they probably wouldn't take the money anyway. Because it's a lot easier to take what you want rather than just being given it to you and then leave. Because why would you do that? You've got the place at your mercy.
All the while, across the water, there was Rome. Ha! Look at those morons. We just kicked their ass in the First Punic War, and now their own mercenaries are revolting.
Just give it a few hundred years, then you're going to meet a man named Spartacus. And granted, he wasn't a mercenary, he was a slave, but you think this is funny, little man? Just wait till Spartacus shows up.
Haha, yeah. Wait, First Punic War? You mean there's going to be a second one? Well, we're definitely taking advantage of this situation. So almost certainly, yes. The Romans did, in fact, take advantage of the situation. Amongst the chaos, rebels on the Carthaginian island of Sardinia sent out a cry for help to Rome. Hot diggity dog, said the Romans. That's free real estate. And so in they went. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's our island. Get the hell off. Hey, they requested our help. We're simply helping. Oh, no, you don't. Look, we're sending our own army to deal with the rebels, okay? But just to be clear, we're not trying to start a fight with you, so, don't declare war on us or anything. War! We surrender! Great. And as part of the peace treaty, we get to keep these islands.
Yeah, that did happen. Like, the threat of war alone was enough to get the Carthaginians to back off. And the Romans literally told them, okay, for wasting our time with this, we're basically putting another treaty on you to avoid a war where you're literally going to have to just give us the island anyway.
Carthaginians were hopping mad. As if their humiliating loss in the First Punic War wasn't bad enough, the Romans now took advantage of their mercenary problem and stole their islands. This shocking land grab was pretty hard to justify, even by Roman standards. Additionally, the Romans now demanded Carthage pay them even more money on top of what was already owed. If Rome was trying to make Carthage as mad as possible, they were doing a fantastic job.
Johnson, you're fired.
What? Johnson, you're fired. You're ruining us against the Romans.
The second
well, the Romans have a crappy navy. Actually, by this point, their navy's better than the Carthaginians. That's the entire one of the reasons the Romans won the First Punic War in the first place, is that they basically copied a Carthaginian ship and over time got better and better at naval warfare. Were they the best at it? No, never. But they at least, that's the crazy thing about Rome. Rome adapted to every enemy it fought. Oh, the Carthaginians are good at naval combat? Well, we'll build ships of our own and we'll fight them in naval battles. Oh, we're losing because we can't fight naval battles properly? We'll make the Corvus, which is this huge boarding arm that slams down on top of ships and allows our guys to cross over to theirs and take it from them. The Romans basically got better and better at it. That's the thing. Romans always adapt to their enemy. The Romans will adapt to the times or the enemy to basically ensure they have the best chance.
Punic War were being sown, and they were being watered with Carthaginian tears. Resentment in Carthage only continued to grow. Eventually, Carthage solved their mercenary problem thanks to Carthaginian military genius and hero of the First Punic War, Hamilcar Barca. He sorted those naughty mercenaries out with some good old-fashioned atrocities, and the destructive mercenary war was over. Still, all was not well in Carthage. Mere decades ago, they were the top dogs in the Western Mediterranean. Now, after the crushing defeat in the First Punic War and a huge bill to pay the Romans.
Hold on, let's see. Not even a great starting point. No money, no problems. Does anyone know a good finance? That screams at the bottom. That's not on the chart. See, does anyone know a good finance podcast? Just stop being poor, like FTX, but worse.
Carthage was well and truly under Rome's thumb. What on earth were they supposed to do? If they wanted any chance at regaining their former strength, there was one thing they needed now, more than anything: money. But as long as they owed Rome $1 bazillion, there was nothing they could do. Fortunately for them, amongst their ranks, there was one big hunk of a man with one big clump of a brain. Me!
Hamilcar Barca!
Yes! Wait, why do you all have the exact same voice? I have it too! That's right. Hero of the First Punic War, greatest general alive, and the poster above my bed. Hamilcar Barca had an idea. All right, we need money? Well, I've got one word for you. Spain. An area filled with lucrative silver mines, from which the silver would flow like a river, and our pockets would be stuffed, like Tony's mother at a buffet. Hey! So here's my proposal. What the hell? You send me with an army to Spain. I'll expand our territory, get those silver mines up and running, and we'll be able to pay the Romans back in no time. Okay. But just to check, you're not secretly raising the money to go on a bloodthirsty revenge spree against Rome, are you? Because we can't afford that. Hanno, my dear, I'm simply going to pay them back.
Now, it should be mentioned that this army that goes to Spain, Hamilcar funds himself. Hamilcar Barca should, in my opinion, be just as famous as his son, because Hamilcar didn't lose the First Punic War. Hamilcar's forces were never defeated during the First Punic War. When he fought in Sicily, the Romans never defeated him. Never. He was undefeated. But the Carthaginian oligarchy and nobility did surrender to Rome. And as the saying goes, for Hamilcar, I took that personally. And he did take it personally. So much so that this would basically be more, like Hanno said, this is more of a revenge quest for Hamilcar than anything. Because, like I said, he funds the army himself. So, yeah, the entire mercenary army that he will take to Spain will be incredibly and uncompromisingly loyal to the Barca family. They do not...
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, no. They do not answer to Carthage. They do not answer to the nobility. They answer to Hamilcar. And Hamilcar promised to pay Rome back. That
isn't reassuring. Few in Carthage were as bitter about their loss in the First Punic War as Hamilcar Barca. 98% of his brain matter had been reallocated to thoughts of revenge. He was also fed up with the Carthaginian politicians for what he deemed
they're playing Settlers of Catan. Yes, no wonder they didn't get along with anybody or work well together. If you're playing Catan, you have no friends. Catan is one of the ultimate friendship destroyers, right next to Dokapon Kingdom and Mario Party.
A cowardly betrayal when they surrendered at the end of the last war. And so for Hamilcar, going to Spain meant being able to act independently from the weak Carthaginian government, building his own strength, and then perhaps somewhere down the line, revenge. However, he wasn't going to Spain by himself. Hannibal? Yes, father? Would you like to come with me to build an empire in Spain? Oh boy, would I! Barbara, mind if I take our 9-year-old son with me? I want to implant an intense hatred of Rome in him and prepare him for a glorious campaign of vengeance. Just try not to traumatize him, dear. No promises. The young boy Hannibal would accompany his father. Watching, learning. Boy, you see that city over there? Yes, father? That is Rome. Do you know what we do to Romans? No, father. We hate them, Hannibal. We hate them with every fiber of our being. But why, father? Can't I just play with my Digimons? No, son! They took everything from us. Our land,
wait, hold on.
Our fiber of our
Back
being.
up.
But why, father? Can't I just play with my Digimons?
Okay, so that, I'm looking at that now. So that's a Gomamon plushie. That's an actual Digivice from Season 1, and that's a Gatomon PNG. Like, that's literally just swiped from the anime. That's a Gatomon PNG. That's actually pretty funny.
Digimons? No, son! They took everything from us. Our land, our wealth, our pride. Those animals. I'll tear them limb from limb. I'll burn their pathetic city to the ground. Dad? I'm sorry, son. I've just never been so proud. Keep going. I'll slaughter their people. I'll cut off their faces and wear them as masks.
Also, to point this out, there shouldn't be any walls around Rome. Because yeah, fun fact, Rome didn't have walls at all until like the age of the Roman Empire. There were no walls around Rome at all because it was expected that no one would ever get to Rome. So like, and okay, let me take that back. There were some defenses, but they were minuscule. You would think that such a powerful city with such a powerful lineage that would follow later would have some kind of massive walls around it. But no, they had very minimal defenses around Rome. And this was because at the time, and again, take what I say with a grain of salt because I think I might be wrong about this, but the whole thing was that the Romans firmly believed, how they had things set up was no Roman general or consul could ever bring his army within range of Rome itself. Add to that, considering that the consuls were always out and about fighting, it was expected that Rome would never have enemies get that close. But, well, things would change, of course. But yeah, there shouldn't be a wall around Rome.
After taking Hannibal to the Temple of Baal and having him swear an oath never to be a friend of Rome, off Dad and son went for their lovely beach holiday in Spain. But Spain was already inhabited by many tribespeople, and when Hamilcar suddenly showed up in their territory, they were like, "Hey, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? I'm teaching my son how to become a warrior like me." Aw, well that's sweet. Well then, little guy, let's see what you got. Good boy. As Hamilcar got to work fighting the tribes of Iberia and expanding Carthaginian influence, Hannibal became a child of war, even earning battle scars from a young age, and he grew to become a great military leader himself.
It's not just Hannibal. Hamilcar had another son named Hasdrubal. He had a lot of sons, but the oldest son was named Hasdrubal, and Hasdrubal is in Spain with Hannibal and Hamilcar. No, he didn't eat his heart. His dad threw him a dog biscuit. So, yeah, Hasdrubal the Splendid, oldest son of Hamilcar, is in Spain at the time, but Oversimplified doesn't bring him up. I'll talk more about what Hasdrubal does later, but he took both of his sons with him. And Hasdrubal would prove to be a pretty good warrior, but he pales in comparison to Hannibal.
Making his father very proud. "I love you so much, son." "Dad, not in front of the enemy." "You killed that guy so well, son." The Barcas successfully consolidated Carthaginian power, got those silver mines up and running, and were sending buckets of cash back to a money-starved Carthage. And symbolizing Carthage's regrowing strength, a beautiful new city would eventually be founded in Spain. New Carthage.
Or as it should be called, Carthago Nova. Or Nova Carthago, depending on who you ask or where you read it. Which basically means New Carthage, but yeah, Carthago Nova.
With a magnificent palace at its center. Carthage is back, baby! What in the name of Apollo is going on here? Ah! Romans! Flowing silver mines? Dancing elephants? What are you up to, Hamilcar? I'm simply gathering the money to pay you back. Oh, okay then. Or are you rebuilding strength to go on a bloodthirsty revenge spree? Like I said, Claudius, I'm simply trying to pay you back. Aw, you guys are hugging. No, we're not! I was hugging. Hamilcar had practically carved out a kingdom for himself in Spain, free from the meddling Carthaginian politicians. His power was becoming immense. But Dad, yes, my son? I'm confused. Are we really simply paying the Romans back? We're not gonna go on a bloodthirsty revenge spree? Of course we are. I'm just saying that to get the Romans off our backs. Listen, here's the most important life lesson I have for you. Vengeance is everything. An all-encompassing thirst for vengeance is great for your mental health. Are you still confused? No, I get it now. But what if the Romans find out what we're up to? They won't find out. Why? Well, Hannibal, because I use NordVPN.
What?
I'm confused again. Do you like your computer being hacked, all your passwords being stolen, and used to create a fake virtual you who drains your mom's bank account? My channel. So thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna skip that.
Now, where were we? Oh yeah. Carthaginian tears, a child of war, and the Carthaginian conquest of Spain.
It should be mentioned that the Carthaginian nobles did know how powerful Hamilcar and Hannibal were getting, and normally they would stop this because, well, duh, they can't have one guy who's more powerful than the Carthaginian council. But here's the thing. See, Hamilcar accounted for that because all the money going back to Carthage, well, yeah, what are they going to do? Are they going to tell him to come home and to stop doing what he's doing because he's too dangerous? No! He's making too much money! He's literally pulling Carthage out of the hole. Why would they stop him? To the Carthaginian nobility, they figured they could just stop him later. But, again, Hamilcar had no plans to stop, so...
The Carthaginian recovery had been staggeringly quick, and Rome was seriously alarmed. But they were also preoccupied with ongoing wars elsewhere, including an expansionist war to the north, where they were enslaving thousands of northern Celts. So for now, to keep Carthage in check, the Romans insisted on a new treaty. See this river. The two sides agreed that everything above it was in Rome's sphere of influence, while beneath it was Carthage. Under no circumstances were the Carthaginians to expand north of that river. But for now, Hamilcar and son were living it up. Well, son, here's to many more years of successful campaigning in Spain. Now, if you'll excuse me, I just have to go fight those guys. See you later, son. I love you. What the? Oh, crap. I drowned? Oh, well. Always remember, son. You are vengeance. Also, delete my browsing history. Hamilcar Barca was tragically ambushed at a river and drowned. His son-in-law, and possibly also his lover, no further questions, took charge for a while.
So yeah, Hasdrubal. Now, it's interesting because I've also heard him called Hasdrubal the Splendid, not Hasdrubal the Fair. But yes, Hasdrubal, which was, in some other writings, was also Hannibal's brother. Now here's, son-in-law, brothers, yeah. Now, thank you for the hydrate and the posture check. Now, here's the thing about Hasdrubal. Hasdrubal was not a bad leader. He was actually pretty good at his job, and he and Hannibal got along pretty well. But here's the problem. The thing is, Hasdrubal never really, he did hate Rome. Oh God, he hated Rome. But Hasdrubal never really liked the idea of being aggressive toward the Romans. Hasdrubal figured that the best option was just to rebuild Carthage up to its, to a more powerful state, and then eventually conflict would come. This was one of the things that he and Hannibal clashed on.
But he too was later assassinated, leaving finally a 26-year-old Hannibal in charge of the Carthaginian armies in Spain.
He was assassinated, but here's the interesting thing. There are some records and some writers who say that Hannibal himself either orchestrated or allowed the assassination. Do I believe that? Maybe. I mean, again, Hasdrubal and Hannibal got along really well. They did disagree on how Rome should be handled, but that's one thing. So, do I think Hannibal, had his brother murdered? I doubt it. Did he allow the murder to happen? Maybe. I'm willing to bet that's probably what happened. Or maybe, he just viewed it as, hey, if Hasdrubal can't protect himself, then why should I have to? So, and again, you got to think about it. Hannibal's the one who gained the most from this. I mean, if his brother's dead, then he's next in charge. So, It makes sense that maybe he had something to do with Hasdrubal's assassination.
Sources say the men readily accepted him as their leader.
And that's the other thing that's kind of suspicious. They eagerly welcomed him as their leader, which goes to show either Hasdrubal wasn't as liked by the troops as Hannibal was, or maybe Hannibal was just that charismatic. We don't know.
He chose to suffer the same hardships as his men. He lived in the same conditions, was often the first into battle and the last one out. And it also helped that he looked a lot like his dad. He had the total respect of his men. If he said jump, they said how high. If he said tuck me in, they said how tight. If he said talk to a girl without peeing your pants, they said that's impossible. Nobody can do that. An army that would follow him anywhere would be crucial for exacting his vengeance against Rome. Hannibal's army had become a strong and loyal fighting force, and that was making a certain nation very uncomfortable. Seeing Carthage re-strengthen so quickly was not something Rome had expected, yet here they were, paying off their debts and expanding their territory. It didn't feel very much like Carthage was under Rome's thumb at all, and Rome wanted to put an end to it. Tensions were strung tighter than your liar's G-string, and all it would take was one incident to trigger all out. And in 219 BC, a city in Spain would find itself at the very center of that fateful incident, Saguntum. Remember that treaty declaring everything south of this river to be Carthage's sphere of influence? Well, Saguntum should therefore obviously be Carthaginian, right? Wrong! Saguntum had actually scored itself an informal alliance with Rome after Rome had helped it with an internal dispute. With Carthaginian encroachment, Saguntum began to fear for its independence, and Rome declared itself Saguntum's protector. But this clearly went against the Ebro River Treaty. So what on earth was Rome doing? Were the Saguntines and the Romans truly just BFFs? It's possible. Or was Rome deliberately trying to interfere with Hannibal's Spanish expansion and maintain a staging post for a future war with Carthage? More likely. And Hannibal certainly viewed this Rome-Saguntum alliance as an outrage. Yet another example of Roman arrogance.
So it should be noted, here's something interesting about Rome. Roman politicians and Roman military expansion was always early on categorized as defensive wars. They were never the aggressor. The Romans always said, "Oh no, we're not the aggressors. We're defending ourselves. We are preeminently expanding our borders because these people were threatening us." If you want a good example, early on in the Roman Republic, what would end up happening is as tensions grew higher between Rome and its neighbors, Rome would launch preemptive attacks, preemptive assaults, defeat their enemies, and basically claim, "Oh, yeah, we launched that attack without warning because they were threatening us." So that was a defensive preeminent attack. We did that to defend ourselves. Mind you, it's a lot easier to look like the good guy if you claim you were doing it to defend yourself. Yeah, preemptive defensive wars. Yes. And in this case, that's what they're doing here in Saguntum. They are basically saying, "Oh, this place is under our protection, so if you attack it, even though it does violate the treaty we signed, if you attack it, you're the ones breaking the deal, not us."
At first, he left Saguntum alone. But having learnt from his father to hate all things Roman, and having inherited his father's dream of bringing Rome to its knees more and more, Hannibal may have begun to see Saguntum as an opportunity. Could this controversial alliance be just what devilish little Hannibal needed to kickstart a second war with Rome
Okay, that's
and
pretty good.
restore Carthaginian dominance? It's even possible that Rome were also using Saguntum to goad Hannibal into a fight, so they could go and kick him out of Spain. And as the two giants began gearing up for round two, the poor people of Saguntum had no idea that they were about to be crushed in the collision. Hey, Your alliance with Saguntum is an insult, and we won't stand for it. They're our friends, Hannibal, and if you lay a finger on them, it'll be an act of war. Yeah, Hannibal, back the hell off. War, eh? I was thinking I might just besiege their city and massacre their people. I hope you do, Hannibal. Find out what happens. Yeah, we hope you do, Hannibal. Wait, what? Maybe I will. Go ahead. Kill them all. Okay then. Fine. Okay, guess I'll do just that. Consul, we look forward to it. Consul, you're gonna protect us though, right, Consul? Consul! Oh no! To top it all off, when the Saguntine people made the genius decision of raiding into Carthaginian territory, enough was enough. In an action that was guaranteed to provoke the Romans into war, Hannibal besieged the city. The siege of Saguntum lasted 8 cruel months before Hannibal broke through the city defenses and turned Saguntum into a killing field.
Now, if you're wondering why the Romans didn't show up, it is because the Romans were still busy handling the Illyrian conflict. There were still Roman forces in Illyrium fighting the Illyrians. They were also still putting down the northern Celts. They had finished that by now, but they still had to reorganize. Their whole view was, oh, the Saguntines can hold out long enough. No joke. Their view was, the Saguntines will hold out long enough for us to finish our wars in Illyria, and then we will go help them. This siege lasted 8 months, by the way. So the Romans, I guess, expected them to hold out for a year, maybe 2. You know, a small city like Saguntum was supposed to hold out for a year or 2. And then the Romans would come help. Yeah, that didn't happen. It should also be noted, because some people have asked this before. I've seen people ask this on videos. I've even had some people ask me this. Why did the Carthaginians murder everyone? Here's the thing. In ancient warfare, if you surrendered, like before any battles happened in ancient warfare, the army would always ask for a city to surrender. If you surrender, in most cases, not all, but most cases, the city would be spared. They would just leave it be. You'd be conquered, sure, but nobody would die. But if you resist, especially after 8 months of sieging, then you better damn well believe these guys that are attacking have had enough of your bullshit. They have had to go through an 8-month-long siege where they have had to watch their guys die, starve, or get sick. And now that the walls are breached, you better damn well believe they're going to take out all of their pent-up aggression and frustration out on everyone in that city. So, again, it's one of those things where what ended up happening in both ancient warfare and hell, even in Napoleonic wars, when an army conquered a city after a siege, if it was a long period, they just let their men go nuts. They would literally just tell them, all right, pillage, grape, and destroy to your heart's content. You deserve it. The Huns did it. The Mongols did it. And yeah, even the Romans would do it. So, in all honesty, the smarter thing to do if you were a city was either surrender outright or pay them to fuck off, which is what the Byzantines did. The Byzantines would pay Attila God knows how much gold to tell him to go away and to leave Constantinople alone. But in this case, the Saguntines figured the Romans would come help them, and they didn't. So Hannibal was just like, all right, boys, have at it.
It was a massacre. What the hell? Tell me I didn't just catch you massacring our friends, the Saguntines. Well, Consul, if you like the Saguntines so much, perhaps you should suck on these nuts. Hearing word of the attack on Saguntum, Rome was understandably in an uproar, and all eyes were now fixated on what would happen next, as Rome sent a delegation to Carthage, led by one of the most highly esteemed Roman senators, Fabius Maximus. He demanded an answer for Hannibal's sins. All right, listen up, scum. You've got a rogue general in Spain attacking a Roman ally, What are we supposed to do about it? Well, there shouldn't have even been a Roman ally in Spain. You're the aggressor here. Hand Hannibal over to us as a criminal so we can punish him severely. No, yes, no, no. Look, I hold in the folds of my toga both peace and war. Which one should I let drop? Whichever one you want.
Yes, these were actual quotes. Fabius told the Carthaginian council, I hold in my hand, like he would hold up his toga and he said, I hold in my hands both peace and war. Choose. It matters not to Rome. And the Carthaginian representatives told him, choose whatever you will. And what was Fabius's choice?
Then I choose. The Second Punic War had begun.
Yeah, he did. They said, choose what you will. And he told them, he said, then I choose war. And the Carthaginians told him, and we accept it.
Pack it up, boys. We've got them. We already destroyed these clowns once, and we were the underdogs. Now, we're the overdogs? Hot dogs. Exactly. This is gonna be easy. Here's the plan. Consul Longus, you take your army and sail straight for Carthage. Burn that city to the ground. And Consul Scipio, you just head on over to Iberia and make sure this Hannibal guy doesn't do anything crazy. I mean, what's he gonna do? Cross the Alps? We're going to what? Cross the Alps.
Okay, so yes, the most famous thing that everyone remembers when it comes to Hannibal and the Second Punic War, the crossing of the Alps. Here's the deal. He didn't want to do this, okay? Despite the fact that history likes to say, oh, yeah, this was Hannibal's plan all along, so he could fool the Romans. That choice was forced on him. His plan had been to basically go the normal route, go through Iberia, get into Italy, and bypass the mountains and get into northern Italy. The problem is, as Oversimplified will point out when he brings up the map again, Scipio's forces block Hannibal's approach. And during a small cavalry skirmish that the two have, Hannibal realizes, oh shit, I'm discovered. And if I try to keep going this way, I'll have to fight my way through Scipio's army. I don't want that. We're going to bypass him. We're going to go around. So, yeah, he chooses the Alps because that's the only option left to him. If he gets bogged down in a fight with Scipio, more reinforcements could show up. He doesn't want to fight right now. So he basically goes around Scipio's forces and gets into Italy.
We're going to what? I just told you. Hannibal will freeze to death. Trust me, Jerome. The Romans are expecting us to fight the same way we did last time. Passively, taking no initiative. They think it's gonna be easy. So this time, we have to be aggressive. We have to go on the attack. It sickens me to say this, but this time, we have to be a little more Roman. You mean we're gonna take poops and baths together? But I'm insecure about my hairy legs. No, I'm saying this time, we're gonna take the fight to them. Think about it. Rome thinks they're simply going to invade us and win the war. So when they suddenly find themselves being invaded from the north, they'll freak out. Like Tony's mother, when the buffet runs out of shrimp. Hey! I gotta admit, it's actually kind of genius. And my hairy legs will insulate me from the cold. That's the spirit. Hannibal, you have my sword, and my spear, and my legs. Ugh. Plan. A daring alpine trek to surprise the Romans was a bold but risky strategy. If it paid off, he could catch the Romans with their pants down, but he could also end up losing a ton of men and supplies in the hostile mountain conditions. Nevertheless, in 218 BC, with a fire in his eyes and some vengeance in his belly, Hannibal brought his force of almost 100,000 men across the Ebro River. They spent months on the road, trekking through the cold, hostile mountain conditions. And when they finally reached the other side, they said, "Hooray! We did it! We crossed the Alps." No, those were the Pyrenees. Those are the Alps.
Yeah.
After crossing the Pyrenees, the army then had to pass through southern Gaul, a vast territory filled with tribespeople, many of whom were hostile to Hannibal's presence.
So yeah, like I said, the conflict with Scipio, which is going to be coming up in a moment, as well as the clashes with the southern Gauls, basically forced Hannibal to take the route through the Alps. Because yes, there is a path you can take that goes into northern Italy from this direction, but Scipio's forces were blocking it. And again, Hannibal didn't want to fight yet. His army was massive, but he planned to get the jump on them by going through the Alps. Because one, the northern Celts are in northern Italy. So going through the Alps gets you linked up with them. You can make alliances and get more forces. You go in the other way, you don't get to meet with them. There's another reason too. Hannibal is trying to move at full speed to get to the Alps right now because, here's the thing, the Alps are dangerous, yes. It's already dangerous enough trying to cross them, but the one thing you don't want to do is cross them during the winter. Because at that point, it's nigh on impossible to cross. Which is why Hannibal is speeding along as quick as he can. But his clashes with the Gauls here, with Scipio later, delay him. And by the time they get to the Alps, it's late fall, turning into winter. So they have to cross during the winter. So it doesn't all go Hannibal's way.
His journey to the Alps was an ordeal in itself, as he was forced to fight his way through and incurred pretty hefty losses before even reaching the mountains. His plan was almost stopped in its tracks entirely, as the Roman consul Scipio, on his way to Iberia, discovered Hannibal was right on his doorstep. Suddenly, Hannibal's journey became a race, as he rushed to get his massive army across the vast Rhone River before the Romans could intercept him. The crossing was chaotic, with the panicking elephants causing several men to drown. And the first combat of the war occurred when small scouting parties from each side encountered one another. When Scipio finally caught up to Hannibal's position, what he found was an empty Carthaginian camp. Hannibal had slipped through his fingers. The Roman consul Scipio felt the weight of the situation. Quite unbelievably, Hannibal was going to cross the Alps into Italy, and the Romans had no idea where he would emerge.
So yeah, like I said, if I back up a little bit, I can show you. Let's look at that map again. Come on. There we go. So yeah, he wanted to go this way through the southern tip of the Alps because the Alps are not as perilous there. But Scipio blocked his path. He got held up on the rivers, and with Scipio blocking his path, first of all, fighting a river battle against Rome would have been costly. So Hannibal was like, well, can't go that way. We'll have to take the long route. And that includes going through the more perilous parts of the Alps during the winter. So even when he doesn't win, even when he loses, Scipio still wins.
Had no idea where he would emerge. For the first time, a Carthaginian force had the Roman homeland under threat. Scipio sent his men onto Iberia as planned, but he himself rushed home to raise a new army so that if Hannibal survived the crossing, Scipio would be there, waiting. Would you look at that, boys? We're here, the Alps. Although it is a little later than I expected. Yeah, it's kinda chilly. We'll set up camp here and wait for spring, right? It's way too cold, right?
Hannibal?
Hannibal? Hannibal's famous crossing of the Alps was brutal. It was already autumn, and the men suffered terribly. It was cold. Men would fall off the sides of icy cliffs. They starved. They fell off the sides of icy cliffs. Some sources say they had to eat their pack animals and would finish off dying comrades in order to take their clothes for extra warmth. And then they would fall off the sides of icy cliffs. Imagine an army of 50,000 men with all of their horses, supplies, and 37 elephants trying to navigate the most hostile mountain range in Europe. And it wasn't just nature that they were up against. Tribespeople lived in the mountains, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A tribe approached Hannibal and said, "Hey man, geez, that's some nice armor. What is that, gold? Man, I'd really like that armor. Hey boss, they've got food as well. Shut up, be cool." Hey, why don't you let us guide you through this narrow gorge? We're not gonna kill you or nothing. Just walk right on through there. We're not gonna kill you. It's just right this way. We're not gonna kill you. Hannibal's army were forced to fight their way through the gorge as massive boulders rained down on them from above. Some clever reorganization of his line helped them survive, and they were able to fend off the opportunistic tribes. But losses from the constant attacks were heavy. As the journey continued, men who went over the sides would get stuck on the ice sheets below and had to make a grisly choice between starving to death or just getting it over with. When the deeply demoralized army reached the summit and rested for a couple days, Hannibal tried to lift their spirits with a rousing speech. Look, men, down there, it's Rome. These plains stretching out in front of you are bountiful with food to eat and Romans to kill. Move, Bessie! Look, you have just climbed the walls of Rome. The hard part is over. From here on out, it's all downhill, and nobody else will die. Except for them. The rest of us here, no one dies. Starting now.
Gonna happen.
Okay.
Rule of 3.
Let's go. Oh, for goodness sake! As it turned
rule of
out,
3.
the descent was as deadly as the way up, with the cold really starting to set in. The path became even more narrow, and at one point, the men spent 3 days in the freezing cold, repairing a collapsed road. When they finally reached the bottom, Hannibal said, "Look, guys, we did it." Well, I thought it went really well. When Hannibal left Spain, he had about 100,000 men. By the time he reached the Italian plains, his numbers had dwindled to about 26,000.
Now, majority of those, yes, were lost crossing the Alps, but I'm glad he mentioned earlier that it wasn't just that. It was also dealing with the southern Gauls. There was the skirmish, the hit-and-run skirmish with Scipio. But yeah, majority of his army was lost crossing the Alps. Also, if I recall correctly, I think at this point, there's only like, I think of the 37 elephants, I think there's only like 15 or 16 left at this point, if I recall correctly.
He was now caught in enemy territory, without a supply line or source of reinforcements. And any elephants who had survived to this point were almost certainly traumatized. So what on earth was Hannibal up to? This supposed military genius had just led a starving and weakened army right into enemy territory. Any modern general who lost half their men to mountains would be immediately fired and possibly even depantsed on live TV. Here's the thing. While Hannibal may not have planned on losing quite so many men, he had almost certainly expected considerable losses, and he always had a plan for how to replace them. Need men? Northern Italy was full of men. Big, burly Celtic men. All the men Hannibal would ever need to beat off Rome. These Celts were filled with resentment, having only recently been conquered by Rome. Hannibal hoped to be seen as a liberator, convince the Celts to cut ties with Rome, and instead join him in crushing Rome. That way, he could gain a source of reinforcements and supplies right in Rome's backyard. But sir, in order to win the loyalty of the Celts, we would need to make a seriously favorable impression on them. How do we get them to like us? Kill them. One of Hannibal's first actions in Italy was to obliterate a nearby tribe who wouldn't join him. This sent a clear message to all the other tribes. It was his wrath they should fear, not Rome's. The realization that a Carthaginian army had just invaded them must have been shocking for the Romans. But when they looked at this ragtag group broken by the Alps, they couldn't have felt very intimidated. However, Hannibal was now in Italy, and he was about to embark on one of the most astonishing military campaigns in all of human history.
Hannibal
The
is at the
Romans
gates.
may not have known it yet, but there was now a monster loose in their territory, and he was vying for Roman blood.
Yeah, this is the Hannibal at the gate.
This video was made possible by Incogni. Use code Oversimplified in the link below for an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Also, make sure to grab our Roman Consul U2s before it's too late. Don't make me mention it a third time, or I'll you know what.
That's quite a threat.
Hannibal's army had survived its famous crossing of the Alps, and he was now in Italy. With Hannibal's arrival, the Roman consul Scipio hit the ground running. In typical Roman fashion, he marched his army straight at the enemy, and Hannibal began preparing for his first combat with Rome on Italian soil. Before the battle, Hannibal wanted to inspire his men, so he staged a gladiatorial death match between captured Celt prisoners, with the winner getting prizes and freedom. He then explained that the whole thing was a metaphor. A metaphor? For what? You! These warriors are you! You're trapped in Italy with no escape. Your only choice now is to fight and win. What about the dead guy? That's you if you don't win. And the prizes? That's what you stand to gain by winning. And the fact that I've soiled myself in all this excitement? No, that's not part of the metaphor. Okay. Hannibal also smashed in the head of a goat. Again, for inspiration. Scipio, on the other hand, now arriving in the area, opted for the more classic route of a rousing pre-battle speech. Look at them men. Weak, starved by the Alps, while we are the strongest military in the world. This will be easy. Like 10,000 horse-sized ducks fighting a baby-sized baby. It'll be like Mike Tyson in his prime, kicking a baby. A tug of war between 10 sumo wrestlers and a... Help me out here, Ralph. A baby, sir? Yes! Yes, that's it! A baby! The point is, there is absolutely no possible way we could lose a battle this easy. So, if everybody's ready, on my mark...
Real quick, let's talk about Roman cavalry. Ugh, blurry. So, real quick, Roman cavalry sucks. Roman cavalry will always suck. Even until, up until, the fall of the Western Roman Empire, cavalry will still, it'll be decent by that point, and pretty good. But up until that point, right before Rome collapses, Roman cavalry fucking sucks. The Romans viewed cavalry as first of all, if you wanted to be a cavalryman or a cavalry member, you were probably from the nobility. You were an equite. You were a high-ranking noble, or a high-ranking patrician, basically, because you had to buy your own horse and everything. But Roman cavalry sucked. They didn't understand really how to use cavalry effectively. And, there was also another thing. Roman cavalry didn't use stirrups. So I want you to imagine that for a second. Everyone who's ever ridden a horse or seen someone ride a horse, you know what stirrups are for. They're to help direct the horse around. Romans didn't use stirrups at all. They, the Gauls used stirrups. A lot of other, African people used stirrups. Either that or they were more used to riding horses. But the Romans, nuh-uh. They didn't do that. Again, Roman cavalry sucked. It was more of a status symbol for them. It wouldn't be till later where you got the armored horsemen, or God forbid, the Byzantine cataphracts, where you had decent quote-unquote Roman cavalry. But for now, these guys are a joke. And they are about to be introduced to the best light cavalry in the ancient world.
The Battle of Ticinus was over almost as soon as it had begun, as the Romans found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed, lightning-fast Numidian cavalry.
The Numidian cavalry, as I said, were probably the best ancient cavalry, the best light cavalry in the ancient world. These men were masters of horse, and they knew how to fight. Being light cavalry, they would ride up and down the line, skirmishing with the enemy, and they would carry a ton of javelins with them. They would ride up, throw javelins at men or horses, throw javelins at infantry formations, and would basically skirmish and harass. And God forbid if they got around behind an infantry formation. These men would play havoc with that. And remember, these are light cavalry. They dance circles, literally would dance circles around any Roman cavalry that went up against them. They were just that quick. And because they were quick, they were perfect for flanking maneuvers and encirclement. Because again, Romans fought in the maniple system, where, you formed up shoulder to shoulder and marched at the enemy. Well, if you're fighting the enemy in front of you, you can't really look behind you. And if you turn around and there's some dudes on horseback stabbing you with spears or javelins, it's kind of hard to concentrate. Yeah, TLDR, the Romans were fucked at this point.
A key element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics. In the chaos, Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some ancient writers, his handsome 17-year-old son, Scipio the Younger, saw his father fall. Scipio the Younger supposedly saved his father, and in the process, earned himself a lot of daddy's kisses. The Romans ended up fleeing the area, destroying the bridge behind them as they went. For a nation so overtly...
Hold on, back up a minute. Let's talk about those guys, because it's cool that I'm really excited that he actually showed them.
Behind them as they went. For a nation...
Okay, so people are probably wondering, wait, what's up with these guys? What's on their heads? These are veletae. So at the time, the Romans like army composition was a little interesting. They had 4 types of infantry. So like first you've got the you've got the Principae, who are up front, the Hastati, who are in the middle, and then the Triarii, or the Triarii, who are in the back. So imagine imagine 3 lines of men marching in a square formation. Up front are the Principes. These are young men, probably in their 20s, who are equipped with a short sword, a shield, maybe a piece of bronze or iron hanging over their chest, and a helmet. That is all the protection they have. They are meant to be the first line that hits the enemy. After them comes the Hastati. The Hastati are a bit older, probably in their late 20s into their 30s. These guys are wearing better armor. They actually have like a full set of armor, a short sword and a shield and a helmet. And then finally behind them are the Triarii, who are the veterans. They are in their 40s. They have been fighting for years, and they are the elite of the elite. In fact, the Romans have a saying to say how close a battle was, where they'll say it came down to the Triarii, which means it came down to the last line of men, the most veteran men had to be deployed. In fact, ancient writers tell us that the Triarii were so bloodthirsty and so often wanted to go into battle, they were instructed to turn away from the battle, like keep their backs to the battle so they wouldn't rush in without orders. And this pissed them off because they wanted to fight. They were the elite. They wanted to get in there. But there's also one more, the Veletae, who were the men wearing the wolf cloaks, or in this case, a wolf head. The Veletae were the skirmishers. Veletae would run out in front of the armies and throw javelins, pila. Would throw pila and throw javelins at the enemy, and then pull back, basically. And you would know that they were the skirmishers by them wearing their wolf pelts. So they were easily recognizable.
So overtly confident in victory, believing Hannibal to be an easy kill, the Romans found themselves running away with their tail between their legs. It was humiliating. And you know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side, just as he'd hoped. Even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider. Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like? Oh, I know. Hey, Hannibal. We want to join your side, and we brought you a present. A gift? For me? I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please be Roman heads.
How did you know?
Running away from Hannibal was humiliating enough, but having dozens of Romans beheaded in the night, now that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Ticinus had been a relatively small battle, but the psychological impact it had early on was huge, and it was only just a taste of what Hannibal was capable of. Despite the shocking initial loss, however, Rome still didn't seem to fully understand the danger posed by the monster now loose in their territory. The Senate was full of excuses. It's those traitorous Celts. That's why we lost. Yeah, and it was a cavalry battle. Wait until Hannibal faces our almighty legions. And our consul was bold. Once he faces our other fully follicled consul, then he'll really pee his pants. That other consul, Longus, had been in the south all this time, preparing to invade Africa. He had seen some success, even capturing Malta. But then he heard the news. Hannibal's in Italy? And I'm being ordered home? But I was gonna be the big boy. I was gonna invade Carthage and win the war. Well, you can be a big boy at home.
No!
Does somebody need a nap, sir?
No! No! No!
And so Longus brought his army on the long journey north. When he arrived in the area to decisively neutralize Hannibal, the two consuls joined their forces together, creating a double consular army. But the two consuls weren't exactly on the same page. Having a nice rest there, old man? I'm wounded, Longus. Pathetic. You don't understand. He's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe for you. Whoops. Listen, we can't just march straight at him like we normally do. We need to train our men through the winter, and we'll try again in spring. Sorry, I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey! I'll kick your ass, Longus. Any day now. I'm coming! Just you wait. Oh, Scipio, you feeble old man. Scipio was apparently quite cautious after his recent encounter with Hannibal, while Longus, typically Roman, couldn't wait to give Hannibal a swirly.
Average height for the time, you. Wait, I want to read the graffiti on the bathroom. Hang on, let's see what it says.
Couldn't wait.
All right, let's see. Banksy, someone's butt was here. Average height for the time, you. Your mom asks for new videos, so I'm taking her to prom. Mr. Terry wears nice hats. That's cool. That's a reference to Mr. Terry History, who's a history teacher who was introduced to Oversimplified. That's really cool.
Wait to give Hannibal a swirl.
Your dad DMs Andrew Tate.
So who would get their way? Well, when two consuls joined their forces, it turned out the Romans had an interesting system in place. They would each take turns being the one in charge. Consul 1 would lead one day, then Consul 2 the next. Back and forth, back and forth. As you can imagine, when the two consuls didn't agree, things didn't go so well.
Now you may think this is kind of confusing, especially for us in the modern day, because for us, we know it as, whoever has the higher rank would be in charge. Like with a general, the higher ranking general, or the one who understands the situation better or has been there longer, is put in charge. But here's the thing. Consuls were a political position. They were not, they were a military rank, but they were also a political appointment. So you can't just say, oh, well, this guy's, been consul longer, therefore he takes over. They were both appointed at the same time. You can't just say, oh, well, he's been in politics longer, therefore he's in charge. That's not how it works. Because your enemies would, your political enemies would use that against you. So instead, they have the back and forth consul system where it's every other day or every day someone new was in charge. This also was one of the reasons that kind of prevented, too much inner conflict. Because remember, there would only ever be two consuls at a time. So, yeah, that was to keep a balance of power. Until later, this would be the way of things. So,
in this case, due to Scipio's injury, Longus probably assumed even more command than normal. Hannibal had Celtic spies in the Roman camp. He fully understood the Roman system and Longus's hot-headed nature.
I see Longus also has no friends if he likes playing Monopoly with his soldiers, the friendship destroyer.
And he knew he could exploit it. For goodness sake! What's wrong, sir? I'm trying to order some pizza, but I keep getting fed all these personalized ads about being a hothead. I'm not a hothead, am I? No, sir. Look at this. Butt insurance? Who would buy butt insurance? Yeah, that sounds really stupid. Sir, it seems like a lot of data brokers have collected data on you. They could sell that data to Hannibal. What? But don't worry, because you can get rid of that data with today's wonderful sponsor.
Oh no.
Incogni. Hooray! I've been getting at you for some time.
Oh no,
So
an
thank you.
ad.
Now, where were we? Oh yeah. Roman heads, a double consular army, and a hothead. Hannibal needed to keep smashing the Romans in battle in order to maintain the loyalty of the Celts, and so he was eager to fight another battle. The combined Roman force possibly outnumbered him, So he carefully crafted a clever trap, and he made sure to spring it while Longus was still in charge. The plan began with his army getting an early night's sleep. All right, boys, time for lights out. Sorry, but we got a big day ahead of us. Tomorrow, we're gonna massacre the Romans. Good night, boys. Dream of revenge. Gorzog, send out the cavalry. That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry made their way over to the Roman camp, arriving just before dawn. Hey, Romans! Wakey, wakey! What's going on? Hey, Longus, your butt smells like a butt. It does not! Scipio, awaken the troops! Longus, these playground insults are clearly meant to lure you out. Well, it's working! Send out the troops! Longus, it's clearly a trap. And I'm falling for it! Send out the troops! Hey guys, wake up. You're heading out for battle. What? But we haven't had breakfast. We're skipping breakfast! I don't think you can do that. As the Romans hurried out of camp, the Numidians began luring them back to the Carthaginian camp, where these gentle angels were just awakening from their slumber. Eat up, boys. We're having pancakes. While the Carthaginians were enjoying their hearty breakfast, the starving Romans were still on their way. Hurry up! We have to catch those Numidians. Hey, why have you stopped marching? Longus, there's a freezing river in front of us. Well, get your gluteus maximus in the water! All right, boys, time to lather up. This oil will insulate you from the cold. It also smells like lavender. There's the Carthaginian camp. Get ready to fight, men. Sir? I think the water from the river is beginning to ice over.
I should mention, because it's either inferred or he didn't bother to say it, this was all... Remember, these guys have been up pre-dawn. So these soldiers are up pre-dawn. They have spent most of the morning marching to battle. Remember, you have to get up, get into formation, and march. So they have been... So, that takes hours. They've crossed a freezing river in cold conditions, and after they get across the river, they need to form up for battle, which, remember, you can only do that with yelling, some instruments, and some flags. So these guys are literally up before dawn, have not eaten, are freezing to death, and are extremely tired because they've probably been standing around for hours.
I can't move. Oh, I'm sorry. You thought war would be fun? Sitting around a nice hot campfire playing Truth or Dare with your friends? Welcome to the real world! Truth, who do you like? Sharon? Ew! Hey, look guys, the Romans are here. Having perfectly orchestrated events so that his enemy was cold, tired, and hungry, while his men were well rested and covered in oil. When the two sides engaged one another, the Romans were in no condition to fight. And the cherry on top, the previous night, Hannibal had sent out an elite force of men led by his brother to go and hide behind a bush. They suddenly sprung out, encircling the exhausted Romans, who were then cut to pieces.
Now, like it says here, there was one legion group that did manage to break the center and pull out. They pushed through the Carthaginian lines and then ran for their lives. So they did break out, but everyone else was annihilated.
Once again, Hannibal's superior cavalry and double envelopment tactics had flummoxed the Romans. But the key word at Trebia was control.
The weak ones used to just keel over and die.
Hannibal used his intel on the enemy and the environment of the battlefield to carefully control the conditions of battle, creating lots of little advantages for himself that paved the way.
Yeah, good intel on the enemy and battlefield, carefully control the conditions of battle, create lots of advantages, only fight on your terms, and don't commit to battle if you don't have control.
To success and concealing troops for an ambush. All of these things are what make Hannibal the genius he's remembered as today. As for Longus, he managed to escape the battlefield with a small number of troops. Disgraced, he didn't want the Senate to find out what had happened, and he began obscuring communications back to Rome. Longus, where have you been? We've been looking for you. Nowhere in particular. Longus, 30,000 men are missing. Do you know where they are? They're taking a bath. 30,000 men? All in a bath? Yes. Longus, what's under that rug? Aurora Borealis? Aurora Borealis?
In your kitchen?
Oh, well, that's my consulship over. Good luck with Hannibal. Bye. Trebia had been a disaster for the Romans.
Yeah, and almost all of Hannibal's elephants succumbed to cold soon after this battle. So yeah, he's got one elephant left at this point named Surus, and he will ride Surus for a few more months, and then poor Surus will die. But yeah, this was the first battle, and the Romans basically lose half to 3/4 of their army.
And as even more Celts began flocking to Hannibal, Rome largely lost its control over Cisalpine Gaul. In Rome, complacency turned to alarm. Hannibal had outwitted them on their own soil and inflicted a costly defeat. But with that, Scipio and Longus's terms as consul were over. They were replaced with two new consuls, Servilius and Flaminius. The Romans may now have begun to realize the trouble they were in and the genius Hannibal had shown in invading Italy. The Romans had expected to be the ones controlling this war. Remember, they thought they were going to invade Carthage. Now their plans lay in ruins, and they were levying 11 new legions to deal with the threat. Hannibal had completely redefined the war.
Okay, 11 new legions. Okay, so again, the numbers may be a little wrong here, because again, the legion sizes constantly change. But a rough estimate, a good way of looking at it is every legion has about 5,000 men in it. They are levying 55,000 men. Okay? They've already lost between 20 to 30,000. Now they're levying 55,000 more. Keep that in the back of your mind.
But Hannibal had a little problem of his own. Things had gone well so far, but the Celts were notoriously fickle, and Hannibal needed to ensure he maintained their alliance and his base of support in Italy. Any Celts he captured fighting for Rome, he treated extremely well and allowed them to return to their homes. But the longer he hung around in their territory, eating all their food and leaving beard trimmings in their sinks, the more resentful they may become. They wanted to go south and plunder some Roman booty, and Hannibal also hoped to sway Rome's other Italian allies in the south to his side. So from here, the path was clear. Hannibal had to move south. Just one problem. There were two main routes Hannibal could take to move south. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly where the two new Roman consuls had taken fortified positions. If Hannibal tried to move on them, he'd be fighting from a disadvantaged position and could be bottled in. There is a third option. Ooh, tell me. We could move through this vast impassable marshland flooded with dirty, stinky, disease-infested water that at times would come up to our necks. But there's no way we would attempt that, right? That'd be crazy, right? Hannibal? Hannibal's 4-day trek across the Arno marshland.
Okay, fun fact, he shouldn't be at the front of the army, actually. Because we have records that say during the crossing of the Arno marshes, Hannibal was at the back of the army to prevent his men from turning around and deserting. Because if any man got the idea to leave and desert, they would see their general, on the last elephant behind them watching everything. So yeah, he was with them the full extent of the way. But this, let's just say this is like, when you hear this, like what this was like, yeah, these guys have been through a lot.
Was hell on earth. Almost as crazy as when he crossed the Alps. Imagine 3 full days, unable to sit or lie down, because there's nowhere to sit or lie down. Meaning 4 full days without sleep, slugging through heavy mud.
Yeah, you heard that right. No resting. There's no place to sleep in these marshes. You have to march and eat on the move for 4 days. Remember, cognitive function starts to fall apart after 48 to 72 hours. So these men are basically almost dead men walking, or almost like zombies. They have to keep marching.
You contract cholera, your foot falls off, and Jim Bob directly in front of you won't stop pooping in your path. In fact, everybody's pooping in your path. Some delirious, sleepless men would see clumps of mud and say, man, I could just sink into that. And then they would. When pack animals died, it gave nearby men a chance to rest, but only for a few moments before they were whipped back into line. Even Hannibal himself couldn't escape the torture of it. Hey Hannibal, if we see a Starbucks, can we stop? I need to take a leak. What? Geez, Hannibal, looks like you picked up a nasty eye infection. Normally for this sort of thing, we just wash it out with some clean water. But as you can see, water everywhere, but it's full of Jim Bob's poop. No worries, Doc. I'll just take care of it myself. That'll be $3,000. When the now...
Yeah, that actually happened. And if what we believe happened is a mosquito stung his eye, or stung near his eye and caused an eye infection that he himself took out with a sword. So, yeah.
Possibly one-eyed Hannibal and his army emerged from the swamp. They were shattered. But he had just managed to slip 50,000 men right past the Romans into rich Etrurian lands, where he could replenish his supplies, and his Celt allies could go crazy, securing Roman loot and booty. As fields and villages went up in flames, one Roman consul couldn't help but notice. The hot-headed Flaminius, feeling it was his responsibility to protect these lands, rather than waiting for his co-consul to come join him, immediately left to go chase Hannibal. Now, this Flaminius was an interesting character. He was what the Romans called a new man. He came from the lower plebeian classes of Roman society, and as a result, he reportedly had kind of a screw-you attitude to the establishment, and a big old arrogant chip on his shoulder. Picture Sid Vicious wearing a toga. That's Flaminius and Hannibal.
It should also be noted, because of this upbringing and his hatred for the patricians, Flaminius also didn't bother to tell Servilius that he was in danger, at all. Because he figured, oh, well, if I get help from Servilius, he'll get all the credit because he's patrician. I'm not. So, screw it, I'll fight Hannibal myself.
Thanks to his spies, knew everything. Just as with Longus, Hannibal knew Flaminius was just the kind of man he could lure into a trap. Hannibal led Flaminius to the entrance of a narrow pass along the north shore of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius watched as Hannibal's army entered the pass. I've done it. I've spotted the enemy. Sir? That big follow us sign seems kind of like they're trying to lure you in. Yes, Gareth. And I'm taking
the bait.
Sir, this really seems like a trap. Yes, Gareth.
And I'm falling for it.
Daylight was fading, so for now, the Romans set up camp. The two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning,
I should also mention, that's actually incorrect placement for the Carthaginian camp. What actually ended up happening was there were some mountains up in this, like some hills up in this area, and there was a small camp left here, and then another camp left up here. And basically the Romans were like, oh, they fled up into the hills. Well, we know there's no way out of those up there. So, great, they trapped themselves. We'll deal with them in the morning. Little did they know.
Set up camp. The two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning, Flaminius would catch up to Hannibal, and he would be the hero of Rome. For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night, Flaminius. Good night, Rome. Good evening, Hannibal.
I love that. That's good. Quick and easy. Good luck finding your teeth.
During the night, Hannibal ordered total stealth. As tens of thousands of troops scaled the wooded hills above the pass.
Okay, falling asleep on sentry duty would get you flogged or worse. So, these guys on sentry duty, ooh boy, if someone caught them sleeping, they would be dead men.
Completely undetected by Rome's scouts. Let's go, girls.
Hey, I understand that reference, Bum ba ba da ba bum bum. Let's go, girls. That's great. I remember that song in my granddad's old jukebox. That's a cool reference. I get that. That Captain America, I understood that reference.
Flaminius took off across the lake shore to try to catch Hannibal. As he did, even the weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side. A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring visibility. Look at this! This is perfect! The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming. Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us? You mean 50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap! The Romans found themselves completely hemmed in on all sides. With zero visibility in the fog, the fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned. And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consul attire, caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance. In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed, and an equal number captured. An entire army completely wiped out, along with their consul. During the battle, the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front and climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was a blood-red lake and a sea of Roman bodies.
I want you to think about that for a minute. Not only have these guys been fighting for 3 hours, which means they would have been totally and physically, mentally, physically, and probably psychologically exhausted. But after crashing through the Carthaginian lines to get away from the battle, they climb this hill, and you see this. The entire lake is stained red with the blood of your colleagues and comrades. 30,000 men are dead. Okay, 15,000 men are dead and 15,000 more are captured. But here's the thing. Given that Hannibal already has a bit of a supply problem, I think you guys realize he probably didn't keep those prisoners for very long.
Johnson, you're fired.
Well, yeah, they probably would fire Flaminius if he was still alive.
Worse yet, when the other consuls sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions, they too were caught and defeated. A double disaster. Rome.
Also, if you're wondering what happens to Servilis, because, you're probably thinking, wait, what happens to him? Well, he survives because he's not there, but Servilis will fight in the next big battle, the biggest battle, and he will not survive that one.
Went into a frenzy. For the second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army. Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety. Women waited by the city gates in tears, hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome. To this point, he had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis. And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority to be as decisive as he needed and hopefully salvage the situation. This all-powerful position in Rome's government had a name: dictator.
Dictator, Latin for speaker.
It's actually where we get the word. But unlike modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up.
And you want to know something that's even crazier to our modern ears? Up until the waning days of the Republic, they always...
Surprise, motherfucker!
Hey, Meeps. Until the waning days of the Republic, these men would always give up their power. The time limits would change. Again, it was a temporary position. 6 months is what most people agree with. 6 months of absolute power to run Rome however they wanted, to avoid the gridlock of the Senate. And after 6 months, at least until, like I said, the final few days of the Roman Republic, these men would always give up their power. Yeah, they held absolute authority only in relation to the specific problem they were appointed to solve. Anything outside the scope of that problem required permission from the Senate and other specific rules that changed over time, such as forbidding dictators from mounting horses in certain contexts, that kind of stuff. But in this case, let's put it this way. Let's say there's a food crisis in Rome. The dictator that is appointed over that now has full power on how to solve the food crisis. That basically means if you can spin it in a way that, oh, well, I'm building the army so we can go get more food from our neighbors. Or, oh, I'm passing these land reforms so we have more farming territory. You were allowed to do that.
And in Rome's hour of need, the man chosen to be dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate, Fabius Maximus.
Y'all remember him? He's the guy who was the leader of the delegation that was sent to Carthage.
So how would Fabius, as dictator, confront Hannibal? Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle. However, he was also stuck in their territory, with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long-term, and he could only remain there for so long.
Mr. Beastburger.
So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while they would gradually become stronger. And so Fabius presented his new idea to the Roman Senate. Okay guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal, when he approaches, we run away.
Boo! Yep. It wasn't just the Senate who hated that idea. All of Rome hated this idea. Fabius was mocked in public by both patricians and plebeians. Now, did they throw stuff at him? I don't know. Probably not. That would probably get you killed. But people openly jeered him on the streets for this. But the ironic thing is, he's right.
Fabius's strategy couldn't have been any less Roman. Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it.
Doesn't he have the power to do that? Yes, he does. He has the power to approach it however he wants. But that doesn't mean that people have to like it. That's the thing.
It seemed cowardly, and Fabius was extremely unpopular. At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south. As he went, in a calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans, all in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, MacDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell. Old MacDonald had a farm. Shut up. But you know who else hated Fabius's strategy?
Hannibal.
Hannibal. He understood the danger he was in. Turning Rome's allies against her required Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle.
That wasn't the only thing it did, though. Beating the Roman armies meant they could then loot Roman equipment and Roman supplies. So, sure, foraging works, and so does getting help from your temporary allies, but that's not going to last forever. Hannibal has to keep winning, because that's how he gets most of his supplies, is through defeating his enemies. But if they won't fight, then he can't do that. So now this kind of limits where Hannibal can go. At this point, according to the ancient sources, Hannibal begins to focus on going to farming territory, supply camps, anything that will give him a large amount of supplies to make up for what he's losing. So the Fabian strategy, which is what this is called, by the way, the Fabian strategy, avoiding the enemy, and whittling them down. And yes, scorched earth is also considered a Fabian tactic, but they're not going to burn their own farms yet. What this also does is it limits where your enemy can go. And at this point, Hannibal has to go where there's resources, which benefits Fabian.
He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him. Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite. That, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself. He left well alone. Hey Fabius, why isn't he burning down your farm? You got some sort of a secret deal with him?
What? Of course not. Hey, Hannibal!
What?
Burn my farm too, please!
What?
Burn my farm too, please!
What? Just yelling at Hannibal.
No! Remember our secret deal!
Well, you gotta admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's problem, however, was that he had to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of Italy, great for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies. But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes.
Remember what I said, that when you can force your enemy to go where you narrow their options and you can make them go where you want? This is that outcome. He's now trapped in the valley.
Haha! We've got him! After he's used up all the valley's supplies, he'll starve. Sir? What are all those lights leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one.
And we're falling...
Stop right there, criminal scum! Nobody breaks the law on my watch! I'm confiscating your stolen goods. Now pay your fine, or it's off to jail.
POV, you're a Roman soldier chasing after Hannibal. Stop right there, criminal scum.
Then pay with your blood!
So, there's one aspect of this that's being left out, is that, for obvious reasons, but, because Prince Dusk asked earlier if Fabian can just do all this stuff. He can, but the Roman Senate gets so pissed off at Fabian doing nothing that they basically decide to do something that will destroy the title of dictator for the rest of history. They appoint a man named Marcus Minucius Rufus as co-dictator. Yes, you heard that correctly. They make another man a co-dictator. And just like with the consuls, the dictators rotate who's in charge on every other day. And during this little event here, which you're about to see, Marcus Minucius Rufus's men go after to stop this escape, what they think is Hannibal's forces escaping.
Expecting a trap, Fabius refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal, only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with torches tied to their heads. They then found themselves caught in an ambush.
And in this ambush, and a later battle too, it might have been this ambush or a battle that happened later, Marcus Minucius Rufus's men are jumped and probably would have been wiped out if Fabius hadn't been sitting at the top of the hill and was like, fuck me, fine, and ran down there to rescue Marcus's men. Humbled and realizing that Fabian knew better than he, Marcus Minucius Rufus basically stepped down as co-dictator and made himself subservient to Fabian. But the damage was done. They basically appointed a co-dictator, so two men who had absolute power, basically.
With the Romans distracted, Hannibal's army was able to slip away into the night, unopposed.
Yep.
Classic Hannibal. For all his inaction, the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius the Delayer. But the thing is, Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done. He was right that constant encounters with Hannibal were bleeding Rome dry, and the time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position.
Now you're probably wondering, well, wait, what happened to Fabius? Well, he had to resign, obviously, because his term as dictator was up, and he would go back to being a senator. Marcus Minucius Rufus would stay in the military, but because he had basically placed himself subservient to Fabian, he did his best to defend Fabian's reputation. Even after all of this, the only reason Fabian was allowed to basically stay in politics was because of Marcus Minucius Rufus, who basically kept telling people, hey, you know, he was right. It's why I stepped down. He knew what he was doing.
Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea. To this day, the act of not engaging an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy. But when Fabius's term finally came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been happier. It was time to start fighting again. However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it. See, Hannibal's tactics up until now had been very sneaky, or, if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable.
Don't you love it? Don't you love it how, you know, in every conflict, there are certain unwritten rules of things you're not supposed to do, and then when you do things that are different or not part of the book and start winning, because you know you should do everything you can to win, but when you do things that people don't like or are completely outside of the box, you get called dishonorable, cowardly, blah blah blah. You want a good example? Just look, and this is not an ancient thing. This is still a modern thing. You want a good example? World War I. Poison gas.
Remember May 20th, 3052.
Yeah. Like, so let's start in the past. 1917, poison gas, shotguns, bombing from airplanes, you know, all that stuff. Mind you, first it was the British were like, you can't use gas. That's illegal. That's against the rules of war. Then the Germans were like, you can't use tanks. Those are against the rules of war. Then both sides were like, you can't send fighter planes up to shoot down bombers. That's against the rules of war. And then the good old doughboys showed up with shotguns, and the Germans were like, you can't use shotguns. Those are against the rule of war. Cut to the modern age, where America is struggling to fight against, the Taliban and other insurgent forces, and constant bitching of, this is against the rules of war. They're not fighting fair. And cut to May 20th, 3052, where the clans get their asses kicked by the phone company, and all the clans in the Battletech universe bitch and say, this isn't fair, you're not fighting honorably, you're dishonorable cowards. Look, at the end of the day, you do whatever you have to do to win. Now granted, there are some things that should not be done, but at the end of the day, you fight, and you fight to win. Sometimes it doesn't matter how you do it. If the chips are down and there's no other option but to win, you fight. As the old military saying goes, if I cannot run, I will walk. If I cannot walk, I will crawl. If I cannot crawl, I will drag myself by my teeth. And if my rifle fails, I'll use my pistol. If my pistol fails, I'll use a knife. If my knife is broken, I will use my hands and my feet. So, yeah.
I'm sick of it. Every time we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush. Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this point, I'm not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Cooey.
Hannibal,
Look.
pocket sand.
Yeah, pocket sand!
This time, we obviously have to switch something up. Now granted, we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking. That can't be helped. It's in our blood. But I have a proposition. This time, when we march straight at him, we do it with a massive army. I'm talking like 80,000 men.
Modern sources say it was closer to 90,000.
It won't matter what kind of shenanigans he pulls. He can hide in all the bushes he wants. There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men. Grow up! You know what I mean? And so it was.
I know what you mean. I'm still gonna laugh at it.
With 2 new consuls, Rome put together a massive army, the biggest Rome had ever fielded, to put Hannibal away once and for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced. But how much experience does it take to be expendable war fodder?
I don't know. That's a question the Soviets probably asked a few times. How much experience you need to be cannon fodder?
As this massive army set out in the summer of 216 BC, the Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be enough to end his entire campaign. And this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they
Whoa, wobbly text.
could do it. Hannibal had taken position at the town of Cannae, where he had captured an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he was eager to fight it on his terms. But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing.
That army's huge! There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men?
You know what I mean.
I think he's right, Hannibal.
Hannibal is then said to have replied, "Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco." This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh and laugh. And when his men in the camp heard the laughter, they were like,
Hey, they're laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle. Yippee!
as for the Romans,
Never underestimate how important morale is. Remember, if you think you're it, you're it.
the consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, so keep this in mind even in the modern era. Think about who's writing the history and what their objectives might be. Because, yeah, Polybius played favorites. Polybius spun things to really make Paulus out to be a victim rather than one of the problems. So even today, make sure you think about the context of who's writing, why they're writing, and what they're writing about.
On his day of command, the rash and hasty Varro, despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out for battle.
It should be noted, Paulus didn't tell him not to fight. Far from it. Paulus actually said, okay, if we're gonna fight, let's fight on the uneven ground up here, where their cavalry won't have an advantage over us. Now, credit where credit's due with Varro. He basically told Paulus, we can't fight on uneven ground. We've got legionaries. We need to keep their formation together. We need flat, open ground. Sure, that puts us at a disadvantage with cavalry, but we got a bunch more cavalry. We can handle Hannibal's cavalry force.
And when Hannibal saw this, he did the same. And here comes the single largest battle of the Second Punic War, and one of the most renowned battles in history, the infamous Battle of Cannae.
It cannot be stated how important this battle is. It was one of the most destructive and costly battles of the ancient world. You'll see, I'm pretty sure he's going to talk about the damage that was done after this battle, but if you know about this battle and you know how it ends, you know how destructive this was. Remember, there were over 100,000 men fighting this battle.
In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure his army was fighting from the south. This meant the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the faces of the Romans.
Pocket sand! Like actual pocket sand. Pocket sand!
Like I said, control. After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2-1. Their army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line like a battering ram and break it. They also chose a narrow battlefield in the hopes it would prevent Hannibal's far superior cavalry from being able to outmaneuver them. They wanted an honorable battle where pure strength, rather than trickery, would decide the outcome. If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it. He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry, waiting for their moment to strike. The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield. The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle.
And now there is no longer any command and control. Paulus is in the middle of the fighting. He's not on his horse. He has, if any of his bodyguards are left, they're with him, but he has no way to issue control over the army now. And Varro has decided to run like a coward, meaning, yeah, there's no one in command of the army now.
But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans, and they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they became a giant mass, trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians. They didn't realize that they were playing right into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy.
Another thing is, they weren't carrying swords. That was their backup weapon. These were phalanxes. These were Libyan spearmen. These were veteran Libyan spearmen who were fighting with long spears.
Oh no!
So imagine, if you will, that you're fighting, you turn to your side, and suddenly there are guys who look like they're Roman, thanks to their equipment, but they're carrying spears.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Yeah, that. They're carrying spears, and they're now shoving you against your brothers in arms from both sides, because no one wants to run into a wall of spears.
As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you. A military general's wet dream. The total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force. The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position. This was the genius of Cannae. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves.
Yes, Livy tells us the men were packed so tightly together they could not lift their arms. Hell, some of them couldn't even breathe. There were also stories that the men in the center knew what was happening and were so terrified of the inevitable, they dug holes in the ground and buried their heads to suffocate themselves rather than face the oncoming Carthaginian attack.
The killing went on so long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or captured.
Now, the question someone might ask when it comes to the butcher's bill is, how long did this take? And turns out, according to the ancient sources, about 5 or 6 hours. So it took Hannibal's army 5 to 6 hours to kill upwards of 80,000 men. It took Yeah, it took basically a quarter of a day to kill this many men.
Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal. Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae. Paulus, for one.
Paulus died. Servilis died here. The guy who, the second consul who watched as, who wasn't able to stop Hannibal at Trasimene. Servilius Geminus. Paulus died here. Marcus Minucius Rufus would also die here, like I mentioned.
But also 80 senators and more. 80
senators. A good chunk of the Roman Senate died here. Hannibal has literally decapitated a good chunk of the Roman government.
It's been estimated that 20% of Rome's male population aged 18 to 50 died at Cannae.
1/5 of Rome's military available men are dead. That is, not 1/5 of
He quite literally decapitated the empire's government.
the Republic's government.
Oh no!
Not an empire yet, the Republic's government. But yes, and 1/5 of military-aged men are dead. This is insanity.
This was it. Hannibal's vengeance. The stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood now lay spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy. Just as Hannibal had hoped, most of southern Italy now defected to his side, including the second largest city on the peninsula. Wow! Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it. That's vengeance. So let me tell you what comes next. Rome surrenders. Their territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands. And Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again. But sir, what if they don't surrender? Jim Bob, did you miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender. Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind. But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them. And he was about to discover an extremely inconvenient fact about Rome. Rome never surrenders. At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need. That officer was Scipio the Younger. But soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio.
Anybody know his title? Does anybody know what this man will eventually be named? The hero of Rome has a very famous name. Does anyone know his title? What is his title? Scipio? Oh, y'all don't know? Here it is.
Africanus, the hero of Rome.
Scipio Africanus will be the hero of Rome. Not only will he turn the tide in Rome's favor, he will also be the one and only Roman general to defeat Hannibal on the battlefield. Coming soon. Really, I mean it. It won't take a year, don't worry. I think.